Hello, and welcome to the Special Needs Sibling Podcast. Here is where we talk about what life is really like as a sibling to someone with special needs. I'm your host, Charlene, and today our guest is Camille. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Charlene. It's super fun to be here.
We get to start every show by getting to know a little bit more about our Sibs family. So, Camille, can you please lay out your family structure and what disability your sibling has?
Absolutely. Thank you again for having me. So I'm the oldest of three. My middle brother is Kevin. My youngest brother is Brian. And my brother Kevin is the one with special needs. Although when I'm a little older, probably from a lot of your audience, I'm not sure. I'm in my mid 50s, and my brother was born in the early 70s when we didn't use the word special needs. That's kind of a new thing. So I'm getting used to using it. I love it, but I was raised. We always just said I have a handicapped brother. That was the word we used, which was super interesting. I don't hear that word these days anymore. But my brother is a nonverbal, cerebral palsy. Quadriplegia now, and he does have a full functioning of his brain in a cognitive sense, but there's been a lot of atrophy because no one thought he did have cognitive ability when he was young. The word that the doctors used back then, and again, this is not a word we use now. I don't like the word, but they used words like mentally retarded, and they said he'll never be normal. Like, these are the phrases that they use. So it's like, my poor brother, I kind of was born into all these labels that now we don't even use, for good reason, because they were wrong. He actually had a brain. He just had a physical damage to his brain through the motor cortex. So his body doesn't have any ability to really be controlled by anything in his brain. So he is completely subject to really just kind of not able to control any part of his body. Although he does control his eyes, he is fully there. He has his emotions. He can move his right arm. It's very spastic. They used to call his condition, I was raised calling him cerebral palsy spasticity, so highly spastic. So they would sadly put him on a lot of heavy medication, and that kind of breaks my heart looking back. I think he was on Valium most of his life, and that's just what they did. So yeah, hard stuff. But the little bit bigger picture is I was raised kind of outside of Los Angeles. My dad was a college professor at Pepperdine University. And so from the age of 2, that was kind of my life, was the university life. And I was the first. And then about when I was 3.5, my brother Kevin was born. And they knew something was wrong at first, but they didn't quite know what. We do know he lost oxygen at birth, and this became a progressive revelation over the next few months that his condition was cerebral palsy, and eventually, while later he ended up being a quadriplegic, but I'm not even sure if I'm using the word completely correctly, but he really has no control over his body. So in that sense, I think he has feeling because his legs used to move a little bit when he was younger. I think a lot of atrophy and just, the whole story of which I'm about to tell you, happened. But yeah, so when he turned 3.5, well, before he turned, but when he was a little baby, I remember sitting with him. My favorite part of the day, and I just always deeply loved my brother. Something really special about him. I didn't quite know what my parents kept saying. He's special. They did say he's special, by the way. They just didn't say special needs, but they said he's very special. And I knew that. No one had to tell me that. But my job would be to sit next to him and watch Sesame Street or Mr. Rogers, or I talk about in the book I wrote, Romper Room, which is like, you probably don't even remember that, but I know I'm learning. I guess some older people might remember, but these are my 3 favorite shows. So we would sit together and we watch all 3 throughout the day, and he would have his little chair. He couldn't sit up on his own, so he'd have his little chair, and then his head would lean to the right, and he couldn't control that. He had scoliosis, and it got worse as he aged. But so my job was to sit next to him and hold his head up, and we'd watch TV. And I remember being so proud to do that. I was so happy to be my brother's protector from a very young age. And I didn't have all the anxiety my parents had. I just loved him. And he was just always joyful. He had a great smile, a great laugh, and I just adored him. But until one day, when he was 3.5, my parents kind of surprised me with a difficult decision. And they had been talking to some friends. They had one set of friends who had someone with cerebral palsy who was about 10 years older. And I guess they were talking to the doctors. And my mom was having a lot of anxiety because my other brother was born by then. And so there was 3 of us, 6 and under, one disabled, one a newborn, and then me, who was trying to, I guess, hold it all together. And the advice they were given was, your son will never be normal. Your son will be a big burden, a lot of expense, and he will never know any differently. You should put him in an institution where he'll be with people like himself, and he'll never know the difference, but then you can focus on raising your other 2 kids and give them a normal life. So, as you can probably feel my emotion on that, that was not my vote. That was not my choice. I had no vote, no choice. And I just remember my parents presented it like, this will be best for him. And little did I know that that would become probably the most character forming emotional imprint on my life, and the catalyst for my journey for my entire life, to seeking answers, and pursuing emotional wholeness. So he was placed in a home, and this is, again, I think your audience and everybody should know that at that age, in the early 70s, this is what they did. This was not a unusual situation, but they really believed in their heart that they were doing the right thing. They were not, but they were also, my dad was a college professor, did not make much money. There was just, they didn't have what now we know as regional center, at least in California, where funds are given to families to help them hire help or get help. So my parents didn't have that. So I don't blame them for what they did, although I have been affected by it. So anyway, is it okay if I'm going into the whole story, or do you want to interrupt me?
Yeah, I can interrupt you. That's a lot I like to call our kids tiny humans sometimes, because they are tiny humans. They're just little. No, that's a lot. Like, I kind of think about like different parts of what you were saying with, the language that we use today, right? Because it's like, and even I was talking to somebody, and then even now we're talking about how people now will use like disability more than special needs. So it's interesting where every sib that I've talked to, like in various decades of life, all have different versions. Yeah, so people who I talk to, like, who are 20-somethings, all kind of, they're not the same, but they all have, like, very similar, like, thematic language. People who are kind of, like, all 30s kind of, like, thematically kind of talk about similar things and experiences, and 40s, 50s, 60s, and I've had 2 people who are 70, who've been on the show. And so it's interesting, so that from the standpoint where you were talking about how, like, with the institutions and being sent away, like, obviously the people who I've had who are 70, they're very, right, for them that's, like, completely normal. There was no other option. There was no, like, oh, keep them at home and stuff, right? Versus when I talk to people who are my age, right, when you talk to people who are, like, in their 30s, it's like, well, no, we're so different in the sense of we kind of had, quote unquote, no choice but then to live with them in our home, right? Like people don't send people to institutions now anymore for a variety of things. And so it's really, yeah, and it's so interesting to kind of talk to different people. That's why I love, like, having different people who are different ages on this podcast, because it's just what you've experienced is not what I experienced, like, in terms of, like, I got to grow up with my sister and you didn't grow up with your brother at that, kind of in your childhood. But what I think is interesting, that is the same, right, is that you were told your life is not going to be normal, right? You were told, like, your sibling is different. And that's very much, like, that message is very, it's very hard to hear. I mean, when I think about it now, I, like, feel sad for myself. I was like, wow, like, how do you tell a child that, right? And when I think about, I think I was probably 4 or 5 at the time when I was told that. And I think about that now, right? I was like, how did I handle that as a 5-year old? Because it's like
No,
you
no.
don't have the vocabulary when you're 5 to be able to say, I don't want that, or why, or right, you can't communicate. You're just like, oh, I was just told by my parents it's like not going to be the same, you know?
Exactly. You're kind of like not given an option to question or ask questions, to question yourself, to challenge, to discuss it. But yeah, like you said, we are tiny humans. We're not like dumb as kids. Like we're smart. We just don't have language. We don't have education yet, but we do have a heart that is just as grown up as any grown up. In fact, sometimes I think kids have more intuition and wisdom than the adults because we've been jaded by life. So hearing those young siblings, at that age, I don't again, I really work hard. I'm not blaming my parents for anything, because they really truly did what they thought was right. But yet with the wisdom of being an adult looking back, yeah, I probably there was a lot shoved down that probably shouldn't have been because it's all coming out now, as we get adults and the more we allow ourselves to process these things, these are traumatic, life-changing events. This is I don't think we're born to handle some of these things, especially as children. These are tough things. So kind of after that kind of traumatic incident, the rest of my life was kind of segmented. I had my normal public school life where I was just a normal kid. In fact, a lot of people, we have a big 40th high school reunion coming up, and I've recently, as we'll talk about later, maybe launched a book, and so some of those people were starting to reconnect to get together, and they said, I had no idea you had a disabled brother. I had no idea. And they didn't know. Well, because I had to live a different life. I was just like one way at school, and then on Sundays when we would visit my brother.
Like that Bruce Wayne, Batman, Clark Kent, Superman, right? Like the whole point.
I prefer Wonder Woman, but yes.
Yeah, yeah, it's a much better.
But what I didn't realize, and I realized looking back, was that I was carrying this very kind of ongoing, dull, empathetic ache kind of deep in my soul for my brother who left us, who had no choice. And obviously the guilt that comes when you're living a quote normal life, going to normal school, going to you could go to you just have your normal life, and I hate using the word normal, but truly that's what it felt like. I was quote the normal one.
Like typical, like
Typical. I know the better word now is typical, the new word, and so I'm learning the new language. But there was a book I reread. I think a lot of siblings have read it, called The Normal One, and I referencing to that about siblings. And I think sometimes, and I always say it in quotes because the reality is we got our own disability in us, our own emotional disability, our own mental health, and things that we either shove down or we don't. But either way, there's consequences, right? So as I grew older, well-meaning people who did find out about my brother would, they would try to say sweet things. They do their best, to try to say, oh, oh, I'm sorry. Like, what do you say? I'm sorry. Well, that's kind of negative. Or if you say, well, there's a reason. There's a reason God allowed this. I'm like, well, I don't like that God. If there's like he made a mistake, or there's they try their best. People try their best. It's like, after I've, I'm a mom of 3, you have a miscarriage. One of my babies was a miscarriage. It's like, well, what do you say? Like, there's just not a lot of good words to say. So the best thing is just kind of someone walking alongside your life and just kind of being there with you and having normal conversations about these things, probably would have been better. But what I found was nobody's words or wisdom ever did much to help with my kind of inner ache deep down. And I later came to define that. Now we know, like, for me, I think it's empathy. It's like this unwavering empathy. And with my brother being nonverbal and very, very disabled to the point where, there's no ability of he's helpless. You when you're the sibling, obviously you feel guilt, like, why him, not me? I think we all go through that feeling at times. And for me, I felt this growing burden as I grew up to kind of be his voice. It just kind of became instinctual the more and more I allowed myself to feel. But I didn't at first allow myself to feel as a kid. Like I didn't know what I was feeling. But I do recall a lot of this is just coming forward in the last few years. As I've kind of coined this book kind of based on my brother, and some of the feelings some of the things I realized is that I was really sad as a kid. Like I remember sitting at the piano. I quit piano. The teacher, I poor piano teacher. I didn't practice. Like my mom was like, you're gonna regret this. She gave me the words like, you're gonna regret one day quitting, but I'll let you quit after 2 years of me complaining because I hated it. But I remember after that wishing I continued, but I'm plucking out like piano music, like to these really sad songs and just sitting at the piano. Like we didn't have phones or internet or anything like that, back then. So I was just plucking out music and like Send in the Clowns or like Ice Castles or if a picture paints 1,000 words, all these really sad, and I would just like sit in memory and like I would sit there and like make myself cry as I'm playing these sad, like what 8-year-old does that or 10-year-old or whatever. So I think looking back, I think that that sadness was because of carrying something that I didn't understand what I was carrying. So anyway, as I've kind of aged now and this recent book I've been writing, I came up with this term called secondhand suffering. And it's kind of like, I think I realized it applies to more than just, siblings of special needs. Although that's my lens, that's my big one. I think that's the target. But it really is more about anytime you love someone and they are hurting or suffering or in pain, you feel pain or hurting or suffering because of that empathy, because of that love. And sometimes it manifests differently than just sadness or, and to fix stuff. Sometimes there's anger. We're all in different situations, because it affects us differently, especially depending on if they're living with us or not. I think that's a big thing. Um, but as a young kid, basically, I want to say I wrestled with those hard, universal cries of the heart, but I didn't really have the words until lately.
I resonate with that a lot. I think for me, I felt much more lonely than I did sad. I mean, and those are two parts of the same bigger
Sure.
picture of that. But yeah, I think when I was growing up, I would because it's just me and my sister, right? So there's just the two of us. So you got me who can
Yeah.
talk and play and do like normal typical things, whatever language we're using, and then my sister, right? She at that time when we were growing up was nonverbal. You try speech therapy and kind of other things, but at
Mhm.
that time growing up, she was nonverbal, and so the thing is, what I in my version of normal, right? It's like I'm gonna get my stuffed animals. I'm gonna pull out my Monopoly board. I'm gonna like play all four people, right? I would play with decks because I love playing cards, and I would then like shuffle them, and I would like deal four people, and I would play all four people, right? Like I got so
Wow.
used to just like normalizing for myself, like, oh yeah, this is how I'm going to play because my sister couldn't do that, and I look at
Oh,
that now, like right going through therapy, like watching now my nieces and nephews like play with each other or their friends, and I go,
yeah.
oh, like that's what that was supposed to be like, right? And that's actually normal, and that was really hard to like to face that as an adult because it's like, wow, like you know that's I had to make my own normal in order for me to be able to be okay to function, to like go to school and like have friends and like do all this
Wow.
stuff, but it felt so lonely on the inside. But you then to your point earlier about us tiny humans, they have so much a bigger capacity but no language and not the tools yet, right? I was already
Uh,
like suppressing feelings of loneliness and sadness because I like didn't want to feel them instead. So I think me and you were opposite in that sense, where like I didn't want to be sad, so I then chose to like, oh, I'm gonna then do all these
yeah.
other things to preoccupy my mind so that I don't have to sit and cry.
So look how smart your brain is now. Aren't you like an engineer? I mean, all those playing four people with cards, you probably developed so much brain power. And I wish I did that. I was a social science major, so yeah, you did yourself a favor in a way of developing that brain. But yeah, that loneliness. I do remember being lonely. Also, my brother, my second brother, was born 5 years after I was. So we're a good 5 years apart. And as much as my parents and sadly, oh my gosh, this was just broke my heart. They didn't mean to say this. They loved my brother Brian so much. Oh my gosh, so much. He was like my mom's favorite for sure. But I think he felt like he was a replacement child for Kevin
Oh
because
no, that's oh that I feel sad for you.
yeah, no,
Oh
no,
man, that's
I
so
I I don't think he realized it. I think I ruined that for him because I when I was writing this book, I was kind of realizing that, wait a minute, I think that because they wanted me to have a sibling because they didn't want me to be lonely. And but of course they wanted another child. They totally wanted him, but it was just some of the language they used. I was like, "Oh, that came out wrong, mom. I know you didn't mean it." And it's true. She didn't. She absolutely loved him, but I do think that was part of the thing was um, to have a sibling for us, like a quote normal sibling who could play cards or games. But our age gap was pretty big, and so we ended up not really doing a lot of that. He had his own friends, I had mine. So I do remember my mom did like we had I had a lot of play dates, so I'd have girls come over, but that doesn't always work. And so I remember laying up and just looking at the clouds and just like making a roly-poly house in our oak tree where like I played with grass and roly-polies and preoccupied my time a lot alone. I didn't have the smarts to do the card game, but I did. But yeah, I understand that is hard. Loneliness is definitely real, especially when you feel like, well, there should have been my sister should be here, my brother should
right.
be here. And then you have the whole like, well, why didn't that work? And those questions that a child would have. Well, why can't my sister play with me? And so
I know that you were processing a lot when you were writing the book, and when we had talked like way before this recording, we I remember you had mentioned it took you quite a while to kind of compile it. But I'm wondering how much did you kind of process before the book part, right, or writing it out versus like did you is that how you started processing, or did you already have stuff that you were processing before you started to write it in some blog or article form or for yourself?
yeah, no, it's a really good question. Actually, I'm processing your question right now. I honestly think I hadn't processed as much as I thought I had. I kind of went through the motions. I knew I had sad feelings. I knew I loved my brother. I knew I felt like I needed to speak up for him. I was already had been experiencing advocacy in major ways, which, we can get into if you want. But when I started writing the book, it was a weird situation. My unexpected. I was basically my oldest daughter went to college and I have 3 kids and my oldest caller went out of state to college in Texas. I'm in California and we dropped her off, flew in on a plane, dropped her off, left, went back home, and I could not stop crying. I mean, it was so hard for me to say goodbye to my oldest. It was a very, very big milestone in my life. One I had no idea would hit me like it did. At the same time, my husband was doing a 2-hour commute each way into a very far away place, and we were struggling because of the just marriage is hard, especially when one of you was never home and the other was raising the kids, and so we were having our own struggles. And then 2 weeks after I dropped off my daughter at school, my mom had a sudden hemorrhagic stroke, and it was life-ending, but it was 5 days of hospice, hard decisions had to be made. It was very, very horrible, and I found myself just in a hugest state of grief, nothing to do with my brother, Kevin, nothing. And after we had the funeral and service and all that, the adrenaline of doing all that and the shock and um I found myself sitting on my couch and I felt this insatiable urge to start writing. And I just started writing and I'm not a writer. Like I was never an author. I'd written one article um maybe a long time ago just for fun. I mean, nothing. I've done nothing. And I just started writing on my computer and I couldn't stop and tears were flooding out of me. But what came out was nothing about my mom, nothing about my daughter, nothing about my marriage. It was all about my brother, Kevin.
Oh, fascinating. But everything that you've just mentioned, which I'm sorry to hear about all of those things, by the way,
Yeah, well,
that's a
thank you.
lot. But it's yeah, those are like completely like unrelated things other than they're like people in your nuclear family. But other than that, there's like nothing in common.
If one of us were a psychotherapist, I'm sure there'd be like some really interesting reason for that. But it, like there is, right? I should have gone to therapy, but I didn't. I have never been in therapy about this ever. Probably a mistake, but I think it has to do with the through line of grief. My grief about my brother and my life and his life, I think had been buried. And it took some other kind of grief to be a catalyst to bring up this deep, deep buried grief about my brother. That's the only thing I can think of was the connection. But oh my goodness, floodgates came out and I felt this urge. I had to write it. And this was 11 years ago. So yeah, it took me a really long time because it was a journey. So part of my processing was in the writing of the book. A lot had done before, but um, it was more like that fight in me. Like I became an advocate. I fought for my brother, and I finally had a voice. And so that's kind of where where my energy went. But when I was writing the book, it was like my energy went to unraveling the grief and and then connecting it to a broader audience than just siblings, because I felt like the secondhand suffering concept went so much broader, you know, it went to anybody that loves someone who's struggling and they can't fix it. And, finding hope became so important because like you said, we were talking before the show, like, it's some of us can't handle the deep sadness because it is sad, it really is. This is chronic, ongoing hard stuff. Like we know, like it's not supposed to be like this, or at least we feel that way. At least I don't know, you know, the grand scheme of thing. Maybe it is. I don't know, but I feel like that for me, the only way out was through. And I became aware of that as I was writing, and, like, I was about to say that, like, other people, you know, it might be a mom who's got a newly diagnosed autistic child, or it might be a spouse. One of my best friends I lost about 2 years ago, and I watched both me going through secondhand suffering as she suffered from, side effects and medical effects of a cancer treatment, where she ended up not making it. But I watched her husband, and this is just hard, you know. It's like we might like my mom with dementia. She had 10 years of progressive dementia between her two strokes. It was just really, really hard. So some of us kind of like can't handle it, and we find other things to think about, or we find the silver linings and everything, or we make the best, or we always find good news, and that's wonderful. I wish I could be more like that. I'm working on it. I'm like, "Oh, this is so hard," you know? It's like so I for me, and I'm not saying everybody has to do this, for me, I felt like I needed to press in through the pain and hit everything face on, like, deal with the stuff that I had buried. And for me, when you could come out the other side, it doesn't mean that stuff wasn't hard. It just means I needed to go on a journey to heal my own heart. And there's a lot we can do to fix our loved one, not fix, but there's a lot we can do to help, to be an advocate. There's so many wonderful things we can do as sibling, and so many silver linings and so many joys that come out of this really hard thing. But it doesn't mean that there's not the hard also. And I think for me, I needed to go through it and not around it.
Interesting may or may not be the right term, but about being a sib, right? Because being a sib is, for like 99% of the people I've talked to, is a forever thing. There are sibs I've talked to where they're sib, you know, like they have an accident later on in their life and they become disabled,
Right.
or the inverse where, you know, they've had some disability and somehow they've, you know, not that it's been cured, but it's much smaller and milder than before when they were little, right? So there's obviously those exceptions, and I've met those people. But at the same time, you know, being a sib, for the 99% of the people I've talked to, it's a forever thing. So it's not just, oh, I've gotten in a car accident and, you know, for this period of time I'm in this traumatic state, or, oh, you know, like how your mom, how that happened to her, right? It's kind of like, on some level, at a certain age, all parents, you kind of like, okay, like, what's it gonna be, right? Is it kind of like they fall down the stairs? Like, my grandpa, like, fell off a ladder, right? Like, there's stuff that's terrible, right? And I'm not saying that we should be proud of that at all. That's not what that's about. But it's just about the idea that as a sib, you're always in this line of fire. You're
Yeah.
always thinking about your sibling, whether that's subconsciously you're suppressing it or you're letting it happen or whatever, right? But there's always this ongoing empathy, sympathy, loneliness, guilt, happiness, tragedy, right? We're holding all those things as, especially now, because we're having to live with our sibs. It's like we're feeling it much younger, right? Like you kind of had the double life thing growing up, which I didn't have that. So, but it's interesting, right? Because now as an adult, you're kind of like having to make peace with both two versions of you now, and you're one person and you have your
Yes.
brother, versus now where I'm functioning as an adult. I'm like, okay, now I don't live with my sister anymore. Like we live in two different places, and I'm like, okay, how do I feel now that I'm separated from her? And how does
Yeah.
that change how I function in my house, right? Because for an example, growing up, actually even to this day, more so growing up, my sister did not like any, like either like everything was on or off, or everything is open or closed. So like microwave doors can't be left open, cabinet doors like had to be locked, right? If one light's on, they're all on. So kind of, we'll call them silly things like that, right? But when I grew up like that, right, then it's very much like in my subconscious when I'm at people's houses or I have friends sleep over, or when I went to college, right? It's like, oh, right, like these are just normal people who just function. They can leave stuff wherever, and they're not
That is
as
so
anal.
important.
So it's a
Yeah.
very different thing to like process, kind of not living with your sib versus you're doing like the inverse. And to that point, it's about, to your point about pushing in versus going around. It's been really interesting to talk to a lot of sibs, because I think you're one of the very few sibs that I've talked to that hasn't gone to therapy.
Yeah. So don't trust anything I say, I guess.
Well, no, and I mean you've written a book, so obviously you've gone through your own
Yeah.
right, and I think that, and that's its own, there are people who can't do that, and not that they can't do it, but they just have a different way of doing it, right? Some people talk to themselves, some people talk to a therapist, some people write books, other people write music, right? That's why we have like artists in the world, and I think that's one of the beautiful things where, even though you say like you try to be optimistic at some points, I think there is a beauty in you being able to press into it and really be able to sit in that sadness, because that's what allows other people who can't push in as much to be able to
Mm.
like have like, oh, I can reach out and like, oh, I like Camille. Oh wow, like I really appreciate what she said, right? And it gives them the ability to be able to tap slowly into that part of the grief that maybe they couldn't have because they're just so busy or so afraid, or they have their own reasons, you know what I mean?
That's actually one of my hopes, is that in a weird way, like how I took my whole life to become like now the voice of my brother. I'm literally his medical conservator, and I'm very, very in every aspect of his life. I am his voice. Like when I go to the emergency room, I run in there and they all, you can't go in yet because they're getting him settled. I'm sorry. I am walking in. I am my brother's voice. He should not be in there without anyone. And my mama bear comes on and I walk in and like, no one's going to mess with me. So I am his voice and no one's going to stop that. So I have this very fierce side to me. But I was also going to say that one of my hopes with just even having these podcast opportunities or writing the book is that I can be a voice for what I call silent sufferers. A lot of us as siblings have been invisible. We have been silent suffering. And that word suffering, people may not love that word, and that's fine. Use whatever word you want, but invisible, feeling alone, whatever word you choose that or you're more comfortable. I chose suffering because I feel stuff so deeply. But that invisibility is something that if I can give a voice to make it easier, like maybe not everybody has to write a book, not everybody has to go to major therapy, maybe just hearing someone else speak what words you're feeling will bring comfort and hope to your soul or to your heart. And that is what I'm finding is kind of happening as I talk to people. It's like I'm giving a language to something that people already knew. It's nothing revelatory, but it's something that when you give it a name, it somehow brings validity to that feeling, and it literally lessens that heaviness where you do feel alone. Oh, someone gets it. And I've had people say that when I say the name of my book, or even, Hope for Secondhand Suffering, Tools for the Heart When You Can't Fix Your Loved One's Pain. People like stop and pause and they go, oh my gosh, I get it. And they get tears in their eyes. And it's people who have been affected by it. It's like there are people who haven't. I personally believe everybody at some point will feel that feeling when they love someone and they can't fix it and something's, very hard in their life. But it's like in America, we give so much attention to like the actual victims, this victim class for everything. And I'm not saying we should have a victim class, but I am saying there has been a set of people, I heard someone say once, like it's like a silent pandemic of people like us who look fine on the outside. We look like we have it all together, but they have no idea. We're actually having a really hard time because we are constantly feeling that ache in our soul. We're constantly thinking about our loved one. And the moment I don't think about it, and I start having a moment of joy, trust me, that feeling comes right back. Who are you to be happy when Kevin's sitting in a wheelchair looking at a wall, slouching down because he can't pick himself up and he's hungry, but nobody knows? I just haunt myself when I feel joy. And that's a battle I'm working on. I'm getting better. I'm definitely better. My book is very progressive. Like you can see the journey I'm on. But I think that's something we all can relate to. And so giving voice to that invisible feeling that we've all had, I feel like I'm excited if you and me both, like you're doing it too. In fact, I just want to say thank you for doing this because up until 2 years ago, I a year and a half ago, I did not know any other siblings.
I was gonna ask you about that. Like, if you had met siblings before, or like at any point in your like young adult life or anything like
I
that.
take that back. There's one girl I love, um, Vicky, and her sister Nikki was with Kevin, and they grew up together. I didn't know her super well until like in the last couple of years. We connected after actually her sibling passed, sadly. Yeah. But other than her, and people I might see at my brother's institution when I would go to visit, rarely would I run into people, but sometimes we would. I really didn't know about this community, and so I've been, listening to you, following you, and I saw you, and I was shocked. Oh my gosh, there's people out there like me, and I'm in my 50s, right? So it was a long journey, and what I'm learning, and now I'm on there's a I'm sure there's a bunch of groups out there, but one of them I'm on Facebook, and
The Sibnet group on Facebook.
yeah,
That's one of
yeah.
the bigger ones on. Yeah, that's yeah.
So I've become a top contributor, not because I was trying to, but because my heart is breaking with all those stories. I mean, there's some
There's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of hurt and happiness. Don't get me wrong, but there's a lot of hurting and going on. Yeah.
I've been shocked, and part of what I've been shocked is because these are people who are living with their sib. Almost always, there are people who are not, and I do think that has been an additional burden that I didn't have. I have different burdens,
Yes.
tons of guilt. My gosh. But I think that people like I've just noticed the difference, that we're all struggling with similar feelings, like with empathy and the sadness or guilt. Um, but like for me, I think I felt in a way just burdened emotionally, like whereas a lot of the people that are living with their loved ones, sibs, are actually having like real visceral feelings of not only emotional, of course, but also like just there's some realities that I never had to deal with. Like your parents have dementia, now you're taking care of your siblings and you have your own kids, and how the sibling might have violent streaks against your kids, like, oh, I never thought of that, and so I'm feeling like new empathy for a whole new class of people that I had never really known, and what I've determined is, first of all, the siblings, no matter what their background or their situation, they're some of the kindest people I've ever seen. The kindness and the heartfelt love that they have for um, for their loved ones, even if they're angry at them because they're they're driving them crazy or whatever, like, and they feel stuck and physically exhausted more. Like my physical exhaustion does happen when I'm in an advocacy crisis, when my brother's in the hospital. I talk about one where he was 8 weeks in the hospital and like, I mean, I'm exhausted physically. It's a whole nother kind of suffering.
Right, and they're all like how overlapping Venn diagrams of similarities and themes, but it is overall different, even though it's all connected to a very similar.
I think it's almost like chronic, acute, like an acute chronic situation versus just a chronic. When you're in the hospital, your adrenaline is on fire. And when you're the only one fighting for your sibling and you're responsible and you have other responsibilities with family and kids, it's like, I mean, there's only so much people can do. I mean, I'm convinced, like, I felt during those 8 weeks when my brother was screaming in pain for 8 straight weeks and they didn't know why, I felt so dark. Like I felt feelings I never thought I would ever feel. And I've heard people say this and I'm like, "Oh, I would never be that." And there I was. I was like, I didn't even want to go on. I was so just drained and exhausted, but it was like I felt so alone. Like my friends, I would try to they say, "Oh, how's Kevin?" I'm like, how do you even answer
You
it? Well,
don't, and that's why. Oh yeah,
he's turning red. The doctors don't know what's going on. I can't leave him alone for a minute because he'll fall out of bed and, he'll scrape his arm, he'll pull out the oxygen. Like, how do you explain what we go through when we're in that advocacy state? And I just I couldn't even answer.
and even in a non-hospital scenario,
Right.
when people ask about your sib, it's always it's so hard, right? Because it's like for especially for people that where their sib is nonverbal, right? Because the hard thing is because the one I think one of the better things I think is to do is if you see the person that can't talk, you talk to them anyway, right? You give them direct eye contact, you ask them, and then you let them decide how they want to communicate back to you. That would be my personal preference, right?
Yeah.
And then the second thing is, right, it's when they're not with you, it's like how do you speak on behalf of them, knowing like, well, you can only answer part of that. They're not there, but that person's just being polite, so they don't, they don't need the full thing, but you feel the guilt of like, oh, but I want to give them the full thing, but it's a lot of conflict just for someone asking, how is this person? Like in a normal circumstance, I think, like if I ask you how your daughter is, you could probably answer that it's like whatever, because you're a
Yeah.
parent, right? But with your sib, it's like a whole different part of the brain that's so much more complex, and I don't know where that comes from at all, but
It's true, it's complicated, and you only have so much energy, and that's where you kinda have to have some boundaries, especially if you've given out everything you can and you are in an acute situation, like a hospital or an illness or something really bad. You do have to conserve your energy, and I've just learned, like, there's times and seasons, and sometimes I need friends and I need to share the details, and usually they'll step up, they'll help, like, they'll offer help, and it's great. But there's times I just need to conserve whatever energy I have, and I just can't even speak. And the people who love me most understand that. But it is hard. It's really hard. I am blessed to have a lot of good friends, which I think is probably why I haven't gone to therapy maybe, or I'm cheap. I don't want to spend the money. But I have been able to talk to some good friends, and that's taken time, to figure out who those friends are. But that has been something that's helped me a lot, is just a community of people who they may not have a sibling like my brother, but they love me, and because they love me, they love him.
right, and that's something that is helpful, and not everyone is in that circumstance, right? Like there's very few people, probably like less than 5 that I have, that I could even begin to try to like explain my sister's stuff to. And I've known these people for a long time, right? But and even then, like there's just so much. Yeah, there's just so many other factors, and like I've moved, and right, there's all these other things where that also dictates like location and who you're friends with and stuff. But having someone to talk to, whether that's a therapist, whether that's a community of people, whether that's someone else that's just important, right? Like whoever that person is, the whole key is that they're there for you. Not that they're not trying to fix you. They're not trying to like, get you to steal $1 million, right? They're there to really hear and listen and help you process, and that's the whole thing, right? So whether you do that with a professional or not is up to your own prerogative, right? But I think that is very fortunate that, and I'm glad that you have those people, or that you had and have,
Well,
past, present, test. Yeah.
like one of them is a psychotherapist in trauma, so it helps I
That
get some
is,
free.
yeah. That, see, there you go. It's just,
Yeah, I think I've cheated a little bit. And then another was a counselor, and I just have really great friends that a lot of wisdom. So it has helped. But I was gonna say, when you're thinking about like the differences like between you and me, and how, and then some of the people that I've seen on this Sibnet chat, that like my heart just breaks. A lot of them just want to be heard. They start off, I just want to vent. They just need to be heard. And that's half the battle sometimes. They just need to be heard, seen, known. But one of the things that I thought of as I was thinking about talking to you today is when I was in college, I was a sociology major, essentially social science, a bunch of soft sciences thrown in together to make one major. But um, I learned something that kind of came up as I was thinking about this yesterday, and it's the opposite of love is not anger. The opposite of love is apathy. In fact, anger and love, if you're thinking about like a wheel, they're like they're like next to each other at the top of the wheel. Anger and love, it's a very small, like milliliter difference. And apathy is at the direct bottom. And so when I'm reading the siblings' comments, and I'm hearing a lot of them have so much anger for like things that their parents maybe have left them with that they didn't solve, or that they're expecting them to like give up their marriage and move across the country to take care of their loved one and their entire life. Like I'm like, oh my gosh. But they're venting a lot of anger. But you know what? It's because they love. They love so deeply. They love their parents. They love their sibling, but they're anger because it's the same emotion of passion, both the love and the anger. And so it actually was. So I was thinking about this. It makes so much sense. I don't see anybody that's apathetic. Taking the time to join this Facebook chat. There's a lot of heartfelt, passionate people with a lot of love and kindness, but they're stuck in a dysfunctional situation, and this is the consequence. There is anger, and it's justified. It's hard. This is hard. And I think just the beauty of people being heard, um and seen, and just having someone just offer a kind word back, like, hey, I get it. That makes sense. You have a right to be upset. But what I love about this group, though, is that most people give a lot of good wisdom. It's not like, yeah, go fight for your rights. Like, yeah, sibling. It was like it's been really neat. And so I say all that because this is new for me. Having people that understand. I've never had that, other than just good friends who care. So I wanna thank you for stepping out and being a part of that solution.
Of course, I'm glad that we got to connect, and like, and I'm glad I got to kind of meet you before your book launch, and like we got to like touch base after. So it's really cool to like just see like sharing your story, and like and seeing it, like it's exciting and scary. I'm sure very also tiring in a completely different, unrelated capacity than just being a mom and a sister to your brothers.
Well, when you're doing something that you feel kind of is your purpose, I feel like you have the energy to do it. One of my favorite quotes, let's see if I can remember it, but is you may have heard of it, Frederick Buechner. I believe I'm saying that right. But he said, the place God calls you to is the place where your deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meet.
Oh, yeah.
And what I propose, although I don't know if I'm allowed to propose a change to his quote, but I think that's true. But I also think the place God calls you to is the place where your deep sadness and the world's deep hunger meet. That's my own twist. I think it works both ways. And so you just said, like, I'm doing a lot of work for this book and podcast and stuff. It doesn't feel like work because I feel like this is my purpose. Like if I could find purpose from pain with what I've gone through with my brother, to be able to be a voice and to give some things that have helped me on my journey to others who might be younger or maybe it's my age. And
Yep, they're out there. I've met them.
like to me, that gives me such a sense of purpose. And when you have a sense of purpose, it actually helps your pain. And so, because the world needs people who can walk out what they've learned from their own journey. And usually we learn the most when there's points of pain, there's points of hardship. Like we end up, we don't necessarily overcome it ever. Like you said, this is a lifelong journey, but we learn from it, and we do find good, and we find silver linings, and we find things that might make improvements in our life or in our siblings' life. And there's things we can do. We can't do it all, but we can do some things. And even if it's just learning how to have better boundaries so that we do function, in the world.
I guess speaking of finding good things, do you have any words of encouragement for all of our siblings listening out there?
Yeah, great question. I guess I would say, the thing that's really helped me is just, first of all, know that if your situation's hard, you can make a difference. Your voice is critical. Being an advocate is so wonderful. It's very selfless. And so don't give up on that. Don't waste a lot of time with guilt, because it doesn't help anybody. It doesn't solve anything. It's real, but try to best you can to work on. It doesn't really help your loved one to feel guilty. So you're wasting valuable emotional energy on that. I still stand by, I think, just pressing through and not around the pain. Like there's times and places where you need to obviously have a break from that, for sure. But for me, I guess, in like finding purpose from your pain, like I just said, is great. If there's something that you can do, like that, something you've learned that you can help someone else, that will give you some more hope in your life and more encouragement and more. I think it lessens the load of some of the stuff that you might be carrying when you feel like you can make purpose out. I know one of the people on the chat is like doing a concert with their siblings' new speech device, and they play the violin, and they're going to do a little show.
Oh, very cool. That's awesome.
And then I guess the last thing I'd say is just to encourage is, I think we all need to go through our own heart journey. And so I believe we're body, soul, and spirit. I think like kind of like a three-legged stool. Like if we don't feed each part of that, we kind of fall down. And so I think obviously taking care of your body, physical body, is important. I won't waste time on that. Everybody knows what to do about that, right? Exercise, move, feed yourself right, vitamins, whatever. The soul, I like to define the soul as kind of our mind, our emotions, our will, like choices we make, like feeding that. Like, are we feeding that with good ingredients? What does that look like? Good books, good friends, good, the sky's the limit of, how to feed your emotions. So it's, music, nature, all kinds of things. And then our spirit, I think we all have a spirit. We're created with a spirit. Like, what is that spiritual direction that you want to pursue? For me, that was a huge part of my healing, is questioning and getting angry at God, questioning, is there a God, going through all of that, that whole journey, and I came through some conclusions that eventually helped my heart in a big way, because ultimately we all have that spirit side to us. And so I think if we ignore that, eventually will come back to bite us. So I think nurturing all three of those is what I would call the heart transformation. Kind of like a butterfly coming out of a cocoon. The cocoon nobody wants to go into. You have like a whole new DNA, and you can fly and you can do things. And I like that analogy.
I like that analogy too. That's a great like picture just to envision it.
Sometimes it takes a cocoon to become a butterfly, right? Sue Monk Kidd wrote a book on bees, I think, the life of bees, and she has a great quote, something about like sometimes we want to be long on the butterflies and short of the cocoons, but sometimes we need to embrace the.
Oh yeah, I like that too. That's very appropriate at this time for me, especially.
Yeah, you'll come out the other side.
Well, thank you, Camille, for being on the podcast.
Thank you for having me. You're so much fun to talk to. I love it. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Special Needs Sibling Podcast. I hope you had a good time listening and feel encouraged in your own journey as a sibling to someone with special needs. If you liked this episode, please share it with your friends. And if you want to hear more stories, please subscribe to the show. You can find us wherever you listen to podcasts. Also, the show can't happen without you. All special needs siblings have their own unique stories, challenges, family dynamics, and lots of life to talk about and explore. This podcast is here to let you know that you're not alone and that you matter. If you would like to be on the show or just chat off the record, please contact me. My info is in the show notes. Until next time, this is the Special Needs Sibling Podcast.